Hello and welcome to today's webinar, The Purge, Don't Be a Deltek Costpoint Data Hoarder, presented by NeoSystems. I'm Don Carnevale, Director of Marketing at NeoSystems, and I'll be the moderator for today's event. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can enter them into the Q&A area within Zoom. We will have some time at the end of the presentation to answer your questions. Also, we will be making the webinar recording and presentation slides available to all registrants in the coming days. For over 20 years, NeoSystems has been the leading provider of back office and professional services for government contractors, including outsourced accounting, finance, payroll, HR, systems integration, reporting and analytics, hosting, IT, and information security, including CMMC compliance. We're fortunate to have a pair of distinguished Costpoint experts with us today. Joining us shortly will be Susan Mitchell, President and Chief Services Officer at NeoSystems, and Kendra Leeser, Vice President, Enterprise Solutions Architect at NeoSystems. Here's a quick look at our agenda for today. We'll begin with a look at some common signs of data hoarding and then look at how to determine what Costpoint data you need and why. We'll also look at the reasons why companies become data hoarders and how data hoarding can impact Costpoint migrations and upgrades. Next, we'll look at strategies you should consider for purging data and enabling better data hygiene. And we'll wrap up with looking at how purging your data can reduce costs and positively impact other sides of your business. Now to get us started, I'd like to hand off to Susan Mitchell. Susan?
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. And I think we're going to start off with a quick poll for you all before we get into the guts of this. So Caitlin, if you want to. So our first poll question is, was your Costpoint database implemented more than 10 years ago? We're just wanting to take some survey information. Okay, I think everyone has answered, so it looks to be about 67%. So yes, you guys are in the right place for this session. Okay, so can we end the poll? Okay, so let's kind of kick this off with signs of data hoarding. And I use this term because I know many, many clients out there that have a lot of data and a lot of years of data. So I wanted to, as we come to the end of the year, and I always say 'tis the season when, we accountants start looking at our Costpoint databases and, rolling the balances forward and everything like that. So Kendra and I wanted to do this just so that everyone had this on front of mind, that now is a good time as well to look at how much data you have. So in regards to the signs, the first one is you have too much data that you don't have a need for. And when I say this, what I mean is there are things that, people will have in their databases that go back, say it's a vendor, a voucher payment from 20 years ago or something like that. There is no reason to have that in your database at that, at this point in time. And again, there are various things, and we'll talk a little bit more later about how, what you can look at for your database. The other thing that is a sign of data hoarding is difficulty removing or parting with data that has no actual value. So basically, a lot of people, if any of you have ever watched, the Hoarders show, you will know that people, want to hold on to data even though they have no reason to have it. They just want to keep this data because they think they might need it. The other one is so much data that it is impacting system performance. So if you are someone that has, a lot of times I've seen, if you have say a NASA contract or a Space Force contract, or one of those contracts where you're having to add, say, WBSs, like potentially like 20,000 project records, a week, so that you can account for that project. Um, but they're not all used. That could be affecting, your system performance. Um, so that's another thing that's kind of a sign of data hoarding processes that are running long and things like that. The other one is unable to make decisions about the data. So a lot of times when we start talking to clients and they're talking about their data and everything like that, they started an effort 5 years ago. They but when they brought everybody together, they just couldn't make decisions about what to get rid of or what to keep and everything like that, and it just kind of basically got dropped. So that's another sign. And then trouble formulating a plan regarding the data. So again, kind of the same thing about not being able to make decisions about it, but you're unable to, get everyone together and get a plan for getting rid of that data. Don, next slide. So one of the things that I like to use when I first start looking at a database to kind of get a feel for, what's going on, what are the tables, like what are the biggest tables and everything like that. So I like to run this SQL script that will allow me, it basically all it does is go in and spit back by table, by table name, the amount of the number of rows in that table. So what that does is it will give me all of the table counts for all of my Costpoint tables, and it will tell me like what are my largest ones, like where is all of the data sitting per se. So I like to use this as just kind of an initial thing to get a feel for where is all of this amounts of data before I start, trying to develop a plan to go figure out how to address it. Next slide. So how do you figure out what data you need to keep? So if you have, like we were talking, a database that's greater than 10 years old, which it sounded like about 67% of you had one of those. There's a few things that you need to look at. So the first thing that you want to look at are your audit requirements. So as many of you know, you'll have varying, authorities that are going to want to audit you. So one of the most common one for us government contractors is DCAA, or any of the other departments like DOE, or somebody like that might want to come look at things or have reporting requirements or audit requirements. So you have the government kind of requirements, and usually you're going to want to take into account the open incurred cost submission years. So if you have 5 open years of costs, I would suggest not purging any data for any of those 5 years. You probably want to keep that handy so that you can support your audit. IRS is typically 7 years, so that you'll have to keep that around to support an audit. There's state authorities that, if you're doing, state and local things, you might have an audit requirement from one of the state and local authorities. You also could have your external auditor. So if you have, say, bank loans or something like that, and you have bank covenants, and you have to have a third-party auditor audit your financial statements every year, you would want to make sure that you have whatever is needed to support those audits or any of those requirements. And then the other thing that you would want to take into account is the government records retention requirements. So there are, things in the FAR that will tell you, how long you need to keep things, or there's record retention requirements, I should say. So you definitely want to review those as well. And then if there's any other third-party requirements, and I can't think of any off the top of my head, Kendra, you might be able to come up with an example
Yeah.
before I slide.
So for those companies who are global now, you might have data or non-US government entities.
Okay. The other one, and I think Kendra has frozen. The other one would be contract closeouts. So contract closeouts would be another, one that if you still have contracts that you need to close out or do final billings or things like that, that would be another thing that would help, help you identify that timeline. And then the other one would be any past performance support. So if you're using, if you're going to use your system for any of your past performance or anything like that, then you would basically want to make sure you have that accessible. Don, next slide. Okay, so how did the company become a data hoarder? So many people, they like to think, oh, we've been on top of this stuff, but there's a variety of reasons that this happens. So I kind of tell you these so you can be more, on the lookout for them to make sure that, you're not falling into the trap. So the first one we already talked about, database has been around for greater than 10 years. The second one is a poor acquisition integration. So a lot of times what will happen is companies will have an acquisition, they will want to integrate it, but they decide they're going to bring over everything that came with that company, and they end up with all of this data, that goes back to, 2009, or like it's 2025 and they have data from this acquisition that goes back to 2009 that doesn't even mean anything to them or the contracts that they're working on. So that's one way that happens. Divestitures, so that's another one where people will end up with data that they think they need and they really don't, because they've completely divested that, it's gone and everything like that. The other one is contracts with complex WBS structures. So with that one, it's things like, Space Force, NASA, Air Force. And those are ones where literally kind of like what I was saying earlier, where you could have 20,000 new tasks that are getting added in a day, but you're not going to end up using all of them. So then you have all of this data that's in there. So ultimately, you don't want to keep those those things those WBSs that might not have been used. So again, you might have a lot of excess data in your database.
Also, other agencies like Department of Energy, where you have funded work orders by DNs or.
Okay. Well-intentioned corporate initiatives is another one. So this is where somebody decides they're, going to use data in a certain way or something like that, or there's an initiative to get all of, data that I wouldn't typically see in Costpoint put into Costpoint for whatever reason. There's an initiative to report on it or something like that. And you'll end up with a lot of data that way. That's one way that I have seen it. And then the other one is just fear. The general feeling that getting rid of the data is a threat, something dangerous, or will cause the company undue harm. So many people, when I talk to them, they always, what they get wrapped around is, well, what if I need it? What if I need that data? What if there's this? What if there's that? So it puts them to a point of inaction. Like they're so worried they're going to miss something, or something, that they need is going to go away, that they end up doing nothing, and they kind of stay in this, the system's not really running great. I have these issues, but I don't want to get rid of this data. Okay, next slide, Dawn. And then impact on Costpoint data migrations and upgrades. Now, one of the things that I would say is when you have a lot of, if you have a database upgrade or migration or something that you're having to do, the size of the database can affect the time, the length of the time to perform the upgrade. It can also, if you're doing a migration, so say you go through an acquisition and you end up being acquired. Well, when you go to, put that data over or migrate that data, it's going to affect, what you're moving over there is going to affect, those migration activities and everything that you have to, test and convert and crosswalk and, all of those things that go into a migration. So it can elongate some of those processes. So I think I will hand it over to, I think actually I have one more slide, Dawn. So before I hand it over to Kendra, so this is the one that I always just say before, because we're going to start talking about different methodologies and things that you can do. But I always caution before purging any data, make sure you have a copy of your database. So what I mean when I say that is, take a copy of it and put that data, put that, set it off to the side, test those things if you want to test them, but basically make a copy and store it somewhere. So that's why I just want to put the caution out there that, if you're new to purging and you're new to doing that, you can take a copy, you can set it aside, and then, you can have it if for whatever reason you have a problem. And then I think we have another poll, Caitlin, if you would pull that up. So purging Costpoint data. Have you ever purged data from your Costpoint system? It's kind of looking like no is going to be the winner right now. Okay, so it looks like 65% or no's. Okay. Thank you, everyone. And I'm going to hand it over to Kendra. Hopefully we can hear her.
Thank you, Susan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So sorry guys, I'm having some technical difficulty with Zoom. So if I disappear, Susan will be glad to continue this. But what we wanted to do is talk to you about different toolkits that come in the applications that are available for you to limit and to keep the size of your databases manageable. So with any of these applications, some of the first things you want to do is first of all, make sure that nobody's in any of these posting screens when you're trying to actually run these applications and processes. So once we make sure and lock people out, then you can go or do them after hours or whatever it needs to be. But you don't want to have people posting while you're trying to actually run any of these purge application screens. So there's several applications available. In the general ledger, there's the Purge Intercompany Receivables. And this is actually for the intercompany or ICR journal entries. And with many of these functions, there is also the ability to print the list of transactions to be purged. You don't always have to do that. However, if the screen comes up and has that box available to you, I highly suggest you check that box, because once you actually run these purges, that may be the only audit trail available to you once you run these processes. So that's the intercompany receivables. There's also a purge journal entries. And with the journal entries, you want to make sure that nobody's, again, editing or trying to post journal entries. It will delete all the different various types of journal entries, including regular adjusting journal, recurring journals, your BSRs, all of those types of journals you can actually purge out of the system. One thing to note, if you purge any of your recurring journal entries, and then you want to run them again as a recurring in the future, you can't. You're going to have to recreate that recurring journal entry. Okay. This one also has project transfers, also takes care of multi-jobs, and it also has that print deleted options report. So I suggest you do that one as well. For accounts payable, the Purge Vouchers application covers both purchase orders as well as accounts payable vouchers. One thing to note, it will also include payroll. It will include time and expense advances and time and expense vouchers as well. The one nice thing about this is it has checkboxes available. So if the voucher has been paid either through EFT or through a check payment through Costpoint, this process can also be used to delete the check history associated with that AP or PO vouchers. And what this does is it does not, any of these applications we're talking about here, it does not remove any of the data from your general ledger reporting tables. It's the sub ledger tables and the sub detail tables. So it will not touch your GL for these as well. So that's accounts payable, accounts receivable, Purge customers and Purge cash history, cash receipts history. If you do either of these, you still have the customer AR information for your AR reporting history. What this will do is if there are customers you have not used, or if there's customers that haven't been used for a long time that don't have any open balances or anything, it will allow you to purge those. If there's open balances for customers, it will send you a note saying, you have customers that have open balances. Okay. For cash receipts, I have had customers delete cash receipts for the current fiscal year. Not recommended, because then when time came to run the 1099s, they didn't have all their information for 1099s and other things from accounts payable. So I wouldn't do current year, but certainly if you have closed years or closed audit years, you certainly can remove those. Next slide. Cash management. So if anybody's doing bank recs from Costpoint, the Costpoint bank transaction history screen is the screen that you can clear and you have all your outstanding and cleared items from. You can purge those for closed years, and those will save up space as well. You'll still have your reports, but you can purge the bank transaction history screen. For fixed assets, anybody who does fixed assets in Costpoint knows that the fixed asset tables and records become very large because there's just voluminous amounts of data. So if you have fixed assets where the asset has been disposed of, it does not have any balances anymore, you're not carrying it on your balance sheet or activity and want to get rid of it, that's the asset information you want to get rid of. If you delete the asset, purge all asset information, and you have other books of record, that will actually remove your other books of record, as well as the asset information. You can actually keep your asset information if you want and purge your posted transaction detail information. There are separate tables that maintain the depreciation and posted details from each of the processes for the disposals and that kind of thing. So if you want the asset history because it's still on your books, you can have that, but you can actually purge the transactions that go along with them. Same with your other books depreciation history. If it's closed out, if you're no longer using it and you were using your other books for tax purposes and your tax years are closed, you can purge your other books depreciation history for those years and still keep your assets if you want. And then the largest one is the asset template change history application. That captures, you define in Costpoint what data elements for both your asset templates, if you're using asset templates, or even your assets in general. You select what what data elements, what data elements you're going to capture, which ones you're going to record. So anytime any of that field gets changed for any asset, it gets captured and recorded. It's great for your year-end audit, your external audits for your asset rollover history and information, but the table does become very voluminous. So if you're done with and your years are closed and you don't need that information anywhere, that is a good database saver of space. Under projects, one other note for assets. Everybody knows with assets who are using assets, once you close your asset fiscal year period, right, you can't open it back up. So just like with the actual asset system, once you do this, it can't be undone. So if you know, before you purge, make sure you want to purge because you can't get that data back. Okay, so now moving on to projects. There's a couple big ones under projects. So there's the Purge project and billing information. The Purge project billing and information, again, this one is not reversible. What it does is it will allow you to take a certain level of a project and delete everything under that, or even the whole project structure. So if you've been in your database for 15 years and you have projects that are 15 or 10 years old or whatever, they've been closed out, you just don't need that information anymore, the years have been closed out, you can actually purge it and it gets rid of everything in the project workflow, including the billing information. So it gets rid of anything associated with that project. Again, revenue, billing, project, but it is not reversible. So make sure you have what you need. Archiving is always a good thing, and Susan will talk about that in a little bit. But that is another way to clear out a good bit of data. The allocation basis journal history is just that. That is your cost and revenue processing utilities. The one thing that if you purge your allocation basis journal history, if you are running Costpoint service centers, Costpoint manual service centers, if you delete your allocation basis history for certain years in the current fiscal year, you cannot use the import feature in the current fiscal year to actually put that back. So the one caveat is service centers, otherwise purge away. Open billing detail history. This one is unique. Everybody understands how open billing detail works. When costs get booked to the GL, they get costs that go into open billing detail. When bills are calculated, it calculates the open billing detail records. However, when you compute a bill that has data in open billing detail, if those records do not either have an amount of hours, dollars, or any other units to bill, it doesn't do anything. Costpoint doesn't do anything with those records. It just leaves them there. It doesn't move them to closed billing detail, or it doesn't put them in the audit tables or anything else. So what happens over 10, 15 years, you have all these miscellaneous open billing detail history records that have no amounts, no dollars, but they're just taking up rows in the database. So this is a great process for just getting rid of those rows that don't have any useful value to you. Okay. All right. So labor, there are some purging toolkits for labor. So you can purge your labor history tables. And so they can be done by project or a range of projects. So where you have closed projects or closed contracts, you can actually purge the labor associated with those. Timesheet history can be purged and can be cleared for your closed accounting year or your closed year. So if you have timesheet history that you don't need anymore, you can also, there's a utility very similar to the open billing detail that is kind of a purge timesheets not cleared by the close accounting period process. So what this process does is it deletes any of the timesheets that have been posted to the GL by the post timesheet process, but have not been cleared by the closed period application. They're just kind of like the open billing detail. They're just kind of left to hang out and reside. All this does is it picks them up from there and moves them into your, it doesn't really delete them, it moves them into your open records and puts them into your history records. So it's more data hygiene than it is data purging. That one is unique. Deltek it's their only application that they actually put a certification on. So when you go to run that application, this big old certification, kind of like a timesheet certification, comes up that says, I understand that this will delete timesheets that have been posted and that have not been, cleared by this process, and they won't be visible here, but you can view them in timesheet history. It's strange. Anyway, so not only timesheet history you can clear, you can also purge crew timesheets. That's in that labor history tables as well. We also, staying with the people, we have leave. So people who do leave accruals and those types of things, there is an application that purges the leave history, and so that purges the employee leave history table. You have a payroll audit file data purge. So once you've done running your payrolls, you can purge your payrolls. The payroll purges can only be done by date. And I would leave anything in your current calendar year there and do not purge it, because similar to the AP purging with 1099s, payroll purging, you'll have an issue with your W-2s. So anything past the current fiscal year or current calendar year for payroll is good to do. Okay. And then in planning, this is a neat little tool. So anybody who's using planning, Costpoint planning, who's doing EACs, this delete historical project EACs is really neat because it allows you to delete multiple versions of EACs at once. You just don't have to delete them one at a time. You can also delete certain projects to delete those EACs and also select a button that will just keep the latest one. So if you've got, quarterly EACs that you do and quarterly approvals on them, you can select how many of those you keep or whether you just keep the latest one or none at all. Okay. Next one. So we're going to talk about summarizing data now. So the other utilities were all purged. So that's removing the data from the database. There are some data summarization toolkits that can be used. And they fall under cost and revenue processing and labor history. So in your labor history file, it will allow you to group the duplicates in the labor history. And when you run this process, it will show you what the actual hours and the actual amounts were for both before and after the purge, so you can see the differences of where you had duplicates in the labor history table. And then summarizing the project utilities or the project ledgers. We're going to talk about project reporting in a little bit, but the project ledger summary, what this does is your project sum table and project burden sum table. What this does is it takes and summarizes literally the year-to-date amount. So it will take your January, February, March, April, May, all the way through to December if you run it for the end of the year. And it will purge all the periods and sub-periods for that fiscal year and just leave you with the last one. Okay. So if you do this, you're obviously clearing up your months of data from your old months and periods and sub-periods. So if you have a 445 and you have 13 sub-periods in the quarter, you're freeing up you know, 39 periods of data plus, okay, for every project. The one thing about the summarized project ledger data is you cannot recreate earlier periods if you run this. What it does is it summarizes it to the last period, and then there's another process that's run that applies the burden cost to that summarized project ledger. So if you only want to ever keep your last fiscal year period PSRs, summarizing the project ledger is a good choice once they're audited, closed out, and you don't need the detailed information by period. Okay. And then archiving purchase orders. So you can archive your purchase orders, which takes the header information and the detailing and moves it over to an archive function. So that will help eliminate space. To be archived, the headers must either be closed system, closed, or void in status to be able to do this. And it picks it up and it lifts it and moves it over to the PO history tables and gets it out of your regular processing tables. Okay. I'm sorry, Don, can you go back one? For those who do award fees, if you summarize your project ledgers, there are some things that Costpoint can no longer do and distinguish. Award fee is one of those. So you want to think if you need award fee history, you may not want to do that. And if you have like direct cost ceilings amounts, if you summarize those and are running things like are trying to look at your revenue summary for those kind of things, you will not have that information for your direct ceilings amount. So if you're going to summarize your project ledger data, make sure you're done. You don't need any of it for audit purposes or anything again. Okay. Thank you, Dawn. I'm sorry. You can go back. Okay. So let's talk about, we've talked about after you've been in the system for several years and the data that you have. We also want to hit on some of the design considerations when you're designing either, when you've got an M&A coming on and you may be changing some designer controls that affect the amount of data and amount of data rows that you're going to get into your data and the cleanliness of your data. So one of those is in your GL control settings. You have a radio button or a control that says post labor distribution to GL as a summary entry. This is not what you actually think it is for most of the cases. In most of the cases, Deltek will tell you not to turn this radio button on. And because it's not what you think it is. What happens if you check this as a summary entry, you won't have your open billing detail populated for your labor reports and those kind of things. So you don't check this box. But the next one, the next two under export timesheets, there's roll-up timesheet dates and roll-up timesheet lines. So these checkboxes, if you check these checkboxes, you will get the timesheets either rolled up by date, and by when we say by date, that means by account, org, project combination by day, right? Or if we say roll-up timesheet lines, then it rolls up the timesheet line to account org project combination. So if you roll up your timesheet lines, you're obviously going to have less lines. So even if you have a semi-monthly timesheet and you have a project that has, time on every day, you're going to have, 10 less lines if you roll up your timesheet lines versus if you, if you roll them up to timesheet dates. Okay, if you don't leave any of them checked, then you get all the detailed transaction entries, and that becomes very unwieldy in terms of size for labor. Okay. And another thing, when you're looking at the design of either bringing on, an acquisition or re-implementing, is looking at your master data elements, your vendors, customers, employees, all those things that are major element categories. Some people will create separate vendors by business unit. Some will create separate customers by business unit, and using multiple. So they'll have 3 or 4 customers for the same customer IDs for the same customer, just depending on legal entity or financial entity that's using them. Another thing that people do that increase the size of the database is they build logic into either project structures or other reporting that's captured in other fields. So they end up creating additional nodes or additional rows of data in the reports or in the tables that could be captured by other relational database elements in either BI reporting or Costpoint reporting. So another way to maintain and to keep the size of your database small is to make sure that your master data elements are in a use that uses other functionality or other system elements to support them instead of creating multiples. Okay, next slide. Susan. So this is one of the things that Susan loves. I love. But this is something near and dear to her heart, so I will turn it back over to Susan.
So as it's talking about on this slide, it's archiving reports. So one of the things that I hear a lot of times when people say they don't want to get rid of data is that they're very fearful of losing their PSRs or something from a historical period, or not having access to something. So the first thing I always tell them is that, with a PSR, if the data, is basically in the general ledger, you can essentially recreate those PSRs for a period. But should you, not want to recreate them, you also have the archiving option. And what I like about the archiving option, so I'll give this example. So I had one client where they had multiple, PMs and people that, on a certain day wanted to, get their project status reports. And they were having a lot of problems because on the same day at about the same time, all of these PMs were going in and trying to run these PSRs and everything like that. So it was slowing down the database, and they were just having, all sorts of troubles. So what we went to for them was we, on, a certain day, had a job that would kick off and would print these various PSRs and everything to the archive. So what that allowed them to do was the project managers, when they came in, they could just go to the archive and just click on their report and download it, be on their way. They didn't have to actually have all these different people going in and trying to basically run the same, PSR report for their little project. So essentially the way that archiving works is that these are the setup screens that you have, for the archiving. So you basically can have a, kind of an archive category that you can set up. So as you can see, you can say long-term, posting archive, short-term. So even your posting reports, that's another good example where a lot of us, and, I've been around many of you for a number of years, and we accountants that have used Costpoint will, we run the posting report and then just put it somewhere because the only time we're going to need it is when an auditor comes and asks for it. So one of the good things for archiving as well is those posting reports, is you can have those go to, print to the archive so that Then when you need them, you can just go back to your archive, find your posting sequence, print the report out for your auditor, and you're done. So again, on this one, you can basically come up with different kind of categories for those reports. So, and it's basically, you can assign those, you can assign those categories to different things, and and it has like an expiration time frame that you can put on it. You can say never purge it. There's a variety of different things that you can decide about those types of reports on the screen. Next slide, please. Okay, so you can also, categorize reports. So you basically, in here, you can identify, different ones if you want to break different reports down. So if you wanted financial statement reports or posting reports or whatever you wanted, you can identify those reports. And again, you can fill in this information on this sheet, and it will, essentially, you can just have the stuff print to that every time you go to do it. Next slide, Dawn. So this one, I just wanted to show you. So when you actually go to print the report, so if you're saving a parameter in Costpoint and you want to save, so say it's your posting screen, and you want to have it print to the archive every single time, you can basically go up into those print options. You can choose choose archive, and it will, basically put things to that archive. So you can choose your archive ID and everything like that. But it will, if you save that parameter, when it goes to run that report, it's going to put that report to the archive. So again, I really like these for posting reports because it will automatically save them over for you. Next slide. And then this is just an example of one of the ones where it was cash receipts. So the nice thing about this, and I don't, this screenshot doesn't show this, but it has the dates also on when that archive, when this particular report was created. So if you're trying to find a report from a certain day, things like that, you can come back in your archive screen and query and basically find stuff. So I am a big fan of the archive feature. Next slide. And Kendra, I'm going to...
Yeah, so in addition to the archive feature that Susan showed you, Costpoint has a canned application for purging their data from the report tables. So if your company's good at, locking down your computing burden cost and those types of things, and you follow a set schedule, you can always go back and you can purge your PSR data or any of these reports, and then you can recreate them from your GL. All you have to do is create your report tables and update your report tables to get them back again. So this will free up a lot of space, again, in your database, but they can be recreated based on the data that you have. And then we wanted to talk about, next slide, Don. We wanted to talk about re-implementation. We've mentioned it kind of in passing on some other slides. And, what we're talking about here is if you've been in your system 10, 20 years, is re-implementing the system. You may not operate in the same environment. You may not operate with the same type of transactions. You may not operate with the same lines of businesses anymore. You may have found better ways of reporting and restructuring your business. So one of the things that will help enable better data and hygiene is to re-implement your system. So that way you can keep a subset of the activity and transactions that's not closed. If you've changed the way you now are looking at the business or doing the business, the data can be cleaner and it can be have a much smaller footprint and now give you the more meaningful, more reliant data based on how you actually run the business now. So it will also give you the opportunity to clean up all those legacy master data elements that we talked about, PLCs, customers, vendors, that whole stuff. And it will allow you to go forward with best practice implementation and architecture that you have going forward. There are some factors as far as making this decision in terms of cost and resource commitment and timing that you need to look at, but it is a way of being able to scale and to have the system for another 20 years. And with that being said, I'm going to switch over and flip to our last polling question. Looks like we have a split.
Yeah, it looks pretty evenly split.
Okay. Susan, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay. So, and kind of, to wrap up our discussion today on data and purging and everything like that. So, I just kind of wanted to bring everybody back to kind of why we do this, or why why when we talk about this, we recommend looking at this and doing all these things. So, one would be lower potential like hosting costs. So, if you are, if you have your database in the cloud somewhere and everything like that, there is an amount of space and everything that your database is taking up, right? So one of the things that you might want to, take into consideration is, basically how big is that database and how much is it, costing you to host this big behemoth database when it could be a small little database. So it could decrease your hosting cost potentially. The decrease in processing times. So again, if you have somebody that, is having to sit there, kick off a process, they're sitting there waiting, it's kind of, it potentially has, can be inefficient from a working perspective. So again, you basically want to decrease those processing times, because again, it's just going to allow you to be, more productive, which kind of leads to our next one. It's just going to allow you to be more productive and, get more stuff done. And then fewer items in the lookups. So I know everyone always is like, well, is that really that big a deal? I have been to some people's, been in some people's databases when I've been helping them, where you go to search for something and the pick list is so massive that the lookups are just the lookups move slow. So what I would say in those scenarios is sometimes again, another good reason to purge is to stop some of those inefficiencies that you're having just because you have so much data. And then the last one is third party systems. So when you're going through this purge process and everything like that, the other thing I want to remind you not to forget, if you have third party systems that are interfacing with these, with your Costpoint database, is to look at those third party systems as well. So, and when I say that, like I had one client that was taking, I don't even know how many millions and millions of records a day and pushing them to a data warehouse, but they were literally updating all of this data every single day. And it was running very slow. So that was one where we were, kind of like, okay, well, you can either filter the data down or, only do like new data past a certain point. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is, be aware of the third party, the other applications that you're using that you might be pushing data to, because it could be making those interfaces, run very long, or, it could, be slowing those things down. So that's the other thing that you want to be, aware of as you're going through this purge process, or when you're looking at how much data you have. Next slide. So now I think we have a few minutes left for questions. So Don, did we have any questions that have come in?
We did get a question that came in. I'll go ahead and read it right from the Q&A area. If we set up the reporting archives, do we have to use a parameter for force the use of archives, or can it be done more in the background? Some departments don't use parameters for many posting screens?
So you can actually, in the user settings screens, you can set up the archive to be something that would default. So when I say that, what I mean is that when they go into any printing screen, like into the print options, it would default archive as, one of the options automatically. So you do have that option that you can take. Any other questions?
That's the only one so far, but we'll allow the audience another moment or two to enter any other questions they may have into the Q&A area.
It's a quiet group today.
It is a very quiet group today.
Okay, so it looks like there's no additional questions. You must have answered all of them during the presentation, Susan and Kendra, so thank you. I want to thank everyone for attending today. As we mentioned at the beginning, we will make this webinar recording and the presentation slides available in the coming days, so please keep an eye out for an email with links to that information. And if you are considering doing a data purge of your Costpoint system and have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're happy to discuss your system, your situation, and provide some options that help you get along. So again, thank you for attending. I'll leave the email addresses on the screen for Susan and Kendra. You can certainly reach out directly to them or to us directly at NeoSystems, and we'll be happy to respond. So again, thank you for your time and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.